It's not uncommon to hear a government minister or the right-wing press complaining about people talking down the UK economy. When the official statistics were amended to show that post-COVID growth was better than previously thought, Prime Minister Sunak said that once again, those determined to talk down the economy have been proved wrong. The analysis in my videos is often critical of government economic policy, and I am often negative about UK economic prospects. So I think that I would definitely be one of those people that Sunak says has been proved wrong. To support his view, there have been various data releases recently which at face value seem like good news. In this video I'm going to go through the good news and set myself the challenge of trying to talk up the UK economy. I am a very positive person, and if I'm being over negative on these videos just to make them newsworthy, that's not what I'm intending. So let's review the good news. There are 4 developments we can identify. First, the GDP growth figures for Q4 2021 were dramatically revised upwards. It was previously suggested that the economy had contracted by 1.2% in that period. In fact, GDP had grown by 0.6%. Sunak's quote was made in response to this. The UK had been bottom of the G7 countries, and a big deal was made of this news story. In fact, I did make a video about it. In fact, the revised figures indicate the UK had similar growth to the other G7 countries and even performed better than Germany. The second bit of good news is that inflation saw a bigger than expected fall in October 2023. At the end of 2023, inflation was 10.7%, and now it's 4.6%. Sunak is claiming that his target of halving inflation by the end of the year has been met. Third, unemployment is at a very low level. Again, this has come about through a change in the statistics which found that unemployment is at the low level of 3.5%. The statistics are actually labelled experimental at this stage, so it remains to be seen if they're accurate. But at face value, this is good news for those seeking work. And fourth, a small house price rise in November and better than expected mortgage approval levels suggest that the housing market remains stable, confounding the predictions of a fall in house prices. Now, despite these positive developments, we still have credible experts saying that the economy is still facing big difficulties. Recently, the Bank of England governor has warned that inflation is not going to keep falling quickly. At 4.6%, it's still well above the 2% target. In an interview with a local newspaper in the northeast, he also said there's no doubt that the potential growth rates of the economy are lower than they've been in much of his working life. Predictably, he came in for a barrage of criticism from the popular press, accused of being unhelpful and a doom-monger. So let's take a closer look at these positive trends to assess what the truth is and whether we all need to start being more positive about UK economic prospects. Let's start with growth. These are the official growth forecasts for the next 5 years. Growth in 2023 is expected to be 0.6%. This is very modest. Over the next 5 years, there will be more economic growth, but it's expected that GDP growth will not go above 2%. Again, all relatively modest. This chart shows annual GDP growth since 1949. The average growth rate in the post-war period up to 2019 was 2.6%. The green line indicates this average level. We can see that the predicted growth rates for the next 5 years are all below this average. We can also see that during the most prosperous periods, 50s, 60s, the 80s, the 90s, the UK experienced some high growth rates way above the average, 4, 5, even 6%. There's been nothing like that kind of growth in the past 20 years, apart from the 1 year of COVID rebound, which was only so high because the economy crashed during the COVID lockdown. To conclude on growth, I think the Bank of England governor is right. Expected growth is likely to be below average for the foreseeable future. Turning to inflation, well, it's a fact that inflation has fallen dramatically. The fall from 6% in September to 4.6% in October was slightly better than expected, and it is good news. All reductions are, of course, good news for the cost of living crisis. We can point out that it's nothing to do with the government that inflation has fallen so much. Because the massive energy price increases have now worked their way out of the inflation calculation, we're seeing the impact of falling energy prices in the calculation. Energy prices are included in household services, which fell dramatically 3.5% in the year to October. This is good news, but it was totally expected. There is still some concern that services inflation is still 6.6%, and core inflation, excluding food, energy, alcohol and tobacco, is still 5.7%. Compared to the 2% target, these are still very high. So again, I think the Bank of England governor is right. There are still inflationary pressures, and it's not yet time to celebrate the defeat of inflation. As I've raised in many videos, the UK is highly susceptible to any future shocks in terms of climate crisis, war in Ukraine and the Middle East, a new pandemic, cyber attacks, etc., etc. We're not exactly in a stable situation. So the conclusion on inflation is that today, as things stand, there is some good news that inflation is coming down as broadly expected, but there are still many inflationary risks. On unemployment, the ONS has emphasised that the figures are experimental, so can't be relied upon yet. But at face value, there is good news here. However, many people have left the workforce after COVID who won't be included in this statistic. Also, it can be pointed out that a very tight labour market is not good for inflation. But let's not be negative here. Low unemployment is a good thing. And finally, in assessing the good news about the stability of the housing market, I'm still not convinced. As I pointed out in my video on house prices, average house prices are currently 8 times average earnings. This is just unsustainable. I still strongly believe that house prices will fall significantly at some point. Interest rates are expected to remain high for the medium term, and the full cost of mortgage increases are still feeding through as people's fixed term deals end. So overall, I remain quite negative about UK economic prospects. The economy is still in a perilous position, and I just don't see that current economic policy is going to get us out of this. We need something much more ambitious. As a final point, even if a more optimistic position does emerge in terms of these basic economic indicators, the UK economy will remain in a mess. We have massive inequality, poverty, fragile public services and crumbling infrastructure. Even if the economy is improving, nowhere near enough is being done to deal with these problems. So I am still negative about the future for the UK economy. I genuinely want things to be much better than they are. I would love to talk the economy up, but we have to face up to the reality. The Bank of England governor is not a politician. That's why the Bank of England was made independent, so that it could produce objective analysis. I don't agree with everything that he says, but I really appreciate the governor's realism about the state of the UK economy. In conclusion, the problem is not that people are wrongly talking the economy down. The problem is the attempted gaslighting by politicians and the popular press in talking the economy up. I hope you found this information useful. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing. I'd really appreciate that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.